everyone. My name's Lamaya Sheree. And a few quick things about myself. So I'm of Caribbean heritage. I'm from Nottingham, if you can't already tell by my accent. I have a pretty big sweet tooth, but most importantly, you may already know that I'm responsible for leading a national campaign to protect Black children against Afro-hair discrimination in schools, which was all over the news, all over Sky News and BBC and Channel 4 and so on. And our work led to the Equality and Human Rights Commission and the Prime Minister's Office publishing new national guidance for schools across England, Scotland and Wales. But before talking about this in more detail, I want to take a second to take you on a trip down memory lane. So imagine brushing your teeth, getting ready for school, putting on your school uniform, just genuinely excited for the day ahead. It seems like a pretty standard process for most pupils, right? Like it seems pretty normal. But for way too long, Black children have felt apprehensive whilst getting ready, having been told by teachers repeatedly that their natural hair just doesn't look suitable, just isn't appropriate, or is just too big or unruly or too distracting for school. Here's a genuine question. How can a child's natural identity pose a barrier to their own learning? Silence, right? I can't answer the question either. And what makes matters worse is that the issue is genuinely just so profound. According to the Crown research, 53% of Black mothers say their daughters have experienced Afro-hair discrimination, many from as early as 5 years old. As you can imagine, this can have a severely detrimental impact upon a child's sense of self-esteem and identity and self-confidence. I'm sure you'd feel pretty hurt if you looked at your phone right now and saw someone slating your appearance. So then why do we allow teachers to slate core aspects of a child's identity? Imagine what that does to a 5-year-old child, simply going to school with their natural hair, only to be humiliated by a teacher in front of their peers and told that their appearance isn't suitable for a learning environment. Envision this. You wake up, you get dressed, and you go to uni. As you walk into the lecture theatre, your professor says to you in front of all of your peers in the lecture theatre like this, your hair doesn't look great today, just leave the campus. It sounds completely absurd and unrealistic, doesn't it? So then why do we allow teachers to do this to children, to criticize their identity? And worse still, we allow uniform policies to continuously reinforce the exact same rhetoric. I will never forget the time when I was at a political event, maybe around 10 years ago. It was my first full-time job. I was in a really junior position. And I remember sitting down, just excited and waiting for the speaker to begin, when a senior colleague behind me said in front of everyone, "Lamaya, move out of the way, get a garden rake for your hair, like sort your hair out, you need to get a garden rake." This is a garden rake on the screen behind me. There were loads of politicians in the room, policy advisors in the room, and just no one said anything. I remember feeling just genuinely so shocked that a senior colleague would try to publicly humiliate me, especially using an insult about my hair that had very clear racist undertones. I think that moment highlighted that race-based hair discrimination isn't only something that children are forced to endure in their schools, but that it really continues a harmful cycle that continues to affect adults in the workplace. If something is embedded as the norm, it often just continues to permeate through the decades and through society. And it's often the case that the same Black children who were discriminated against at 5 years old in school face the same racism in the workplace too. And whilst I'm on the topic of the cyclical nature of Afro-hair discrimination, I want to take a moment to define the issue. I mean, we're in a university, so I may as well put a definition on it, as it helps to illuminate, I suppose, the nature of the problem. So Afro-hair discrimination and most forms of race-based hair discrimination commonly refer to the unjust social and economic treatment of Black communities by non-Black communities based upon the style and texture of hair. Afros are commonly viewed as unprofessional, unsuitable, and this can often lead to a wide range of systemic barriers and discriminatory practices and racist bullying. So this not only relates to microaggressions like, unwanted hair touching and inappropriate comments, but it can also lead to much, much wider barriers like potentially being less likely to get a job just because of your style of hair, or being sent home from school repeatedly, again, just because of your style of hair. For example, a research study in 2020 found that more than half of Black children had been sent home from school for wearing their hair naturally or in a protective hairstyle. The same study found that 58% of Black students had endured racist name calling and racist bullying just related to their style of hair. So when you hear people say, oh, it doesn't really matter, it's just your hair, like remember these statistics. They uncover the flaws in these all too common rebuttals. And I think it's also important to highlight that the link between hair and identity is just really deep-rooted. Black hair has frequently long reflected Black history, with various styles being indicative of status and identity and theology. And this is backed up by loads of others too. So the Equality and Human Rights Commission, for example, states that race is a protected characteristic under the Equality Act, and that Afro hair is inherently linked to race. But when we hear equalities bodies and like these big organizations speak about Afro hair, I do want to take a second to clarify what they actually mean. Afro hair is used to describe many hairstyles that are commonly associated with communities of African and Caribbean descent. So Afro hair doesn't only relate to Afros as such, but also to protective hairstyles like braids, twists, cane rows, locks, and so on. And I really want to emphasize how that relates to equalities law. So when a school takes the decision to ban these hairstyles, they place pupils sharing a protected characteristic, in this case race, at a disadvantage compared to pupils who do not share that characteristic. This is so likely to constitute discrimination on the grounds of race, and this is illegal. So when I graduated from Cambridge University and I went and worked for a variety of political leaders, then I just took the drastic decision to resign and to set up my own campaigns organization. We run national large-scale campaigns to advocate for greater racial justice. We're part of Marcus Rashford's End Child Food Poverty Coalition, and we have collaborations with Meta, Twitter, TikTok, the Premier League, and a variety of other different well-known brands and companies. And I just knew that when I started Enact, I wanted to set up a really powerful movement to tackle core issues like these. And that's why I was really proud to build cross-party support and launch the all-party parliamentary group for race, equality, and education, which is such a long title, I know. But it's administered by Enact, my company. And the parliamentary group that we launched 2 years ago is now the biggest group across both houses of parliament. Within its first year, we joined forces with the Halo Collective, which is an organization that works to end race-based hair discrimination. We decided to launch a national campaign against Afro hair discrimination in schools. And our campaign was backed by loads of well-known politicians and celebrities and brands like Dove, Pantene, even Unilever, Procter & Gamble, and so on. Our work hit news headlines across the UK, a few examples behind me. And as I said, it led to the Equality and Human Rights Commission and the then Prime Minister. I mean, we've had a few Prime Ministers since then, but the Prime Minister at the time announced that he was going to publish new national policy guidance in thousands of schools across the UK. We were and still are just so proud to know that we've affected policy guidance, as our main priority is to protect children. And we just want to ensure that no child is ever discriminated against because of their appearance. It's pretty incredible to think that it's now been 4 months since the Equality and Human Rights Commission published the new guidance across England, Scotland, and Wales. People have described it as a watershed moment, as it's one of the first occasions where a major national body has unambiguously stated that Afro hair relates to race, and discrimination on the grounds of race is, of course, illegal. The new national policy guidance that we created also states that if a school policy bans a hairstyle that's commonly worn by a specific racial group, it is likely to be breaking the law. So it's just so important that students and parents and teachers and children are aware that this exists. And whilst we're happy that our campaign has helped lead to this change and we're proud to have been involved in the drafting, I want to make it clear that this milestone is literally only the first stage. I want to see so much more. I want to see more Black teachers, for example. I've literally only been taught by 2 Black teachers in my entire life. Once when I was in primary school, and the second was a temporary lecturer whilst I was at university. That means that throughout my entire secondary and college education, I was never once taught by someone who looked like myself. Those are literally the years where you're learning more about yourself and your identity and your history and the society that you're in today, and ultimately becoming an adult. And what makes matters worse is that my experience is not unique. Did you know that almost half of schools in England and Wales have no Black or Asian teachers at all, even in diverse areas with a lot of Black and Asian pupils? And that doesn't mean that Black adults aren't applying to become teachers or that it's only representative of the wider population. A study from the National Foundation for Educational Research shows that Asian, Black, and other ethnic backgrounds are actually overrepresented amongst applicants to the initial teacher training course. This literally indicates a really high interest in teaching. 2/3 of people from white ethnic backgrounds have their applications accepted, right? But acceptance rates are substantially lower for all other ethnic groups. Only 57% of candidates from mixed ethnic backgrounds are admitted onto the course. Only 53% of candidates from Asian backgrounds, and only 45% of applicants from Black and other ethnic groups are permitted to get onto the course. That's less than half that apply. And I know you might be thinking, like, does it even matter what a teacher looks like? Shouldn't it just be about the quality of education and the quality of teaching? But it genuinely does matter. And I'm not saying it's the only thing that matters. I mean, we can all agree that having good quality educators should always remain at the core. But what I'm saying is that having greater representation of Black and Asian teachers is crucial for a better education system, especially when we think about how racism in schools impacts teacher-pupil relationships and can have a severely detrimental impact upon a child's life. And when I speak about racism in schools, I can't really speak about it without thinking about school exclusions. Exclusion rates for Black Caribbean students are up to 6 times higher than those of their white peers in some local authorities. As I said before, I'm of Caribbean heritage myself, and Black Caribbean girls in England, like me, are twice as likely to be excluded from schools as white girls. So why is this? Research shows that Black girls are often excluded from education after having experienced unaddressed sexual harassment and abuse, poor mental health, and racism from peers and teachers. Studies also suggest that negative stereotypes, discrimination, and the adultification of Black girls in particular play huge roles in their exclusions from school. So imagine being 13 years old. You're facing all of these barriers, coupled with teachers repeatedly telling you to change your appearance, change the way how you present yourself, change even your style of hair. I cannot stress this enough. Our education system needs a massive overhaul. The mental and physical health of the next generation of children literally depends upon it. And I suppose that brings me on to the topic of legacy and how we want to see and shape the world that we live in. And when I speak about systems and barriers, which I know I've mentioned a good few times during this talk, I'm not talking about some fuzzy entity that no one can really identify. I'm talking about our actions and the actions of our friends and our colleagues and our families. Like, we all have agency, and I know it may not feel like it at times, but we genuinely do. And I'm going to give you an example, and this is the last example I'm going to give during this talk. I remember when I was like 11 years old, I was in my first year of school, and my teacher was reading Of Mice and Men, you know, that book that they teach you in secondary school. In the book, there's a racial slur, and the teacher was reading it to us, and she just said the racist term out loud to 11-year-old children. She didn't censor it or anything. And I didn't know what to do. Like, I remember the other children in the class, like, turning around to look at me. I was one of the few black children in the class. And I was at a new school, it was my first year of secondary school, didn't really know any of the other children. And I just felt really awkward. But luckily, I have a really incredible mom who had drilled into me from such an early age that if anyone ever did or said anything that made you feel uncomfortable, just run and go and tell her. So after school that day, I remember I ran straight home and told my mum exactly everything that had happened. The next day, she marched straight into the school, spoke to the school and the teachers, and the school took the decision to censor racial slurs in teaching going forward. After that day, I obviously had to go into school the day after and the day after that. And the teacher probably knew that I'd reported her, but I didn't feel awkward or uncomfortable or anything. I just remember genuinely feeling so proud to know that my actions had led to the school making this change, and that it meant that other black children like me wouldn't have to go through the same ordeal. And I suppose that's why it's just so important to take action when you hear something or you see something that you don't feel is right, because it can genuinely have such a massive impact upon others around you. And that instance really inspired me to speak up. And since that moment, I've always called racism out whenever I see it. And if I can identify something isn't right and make a change at 11 years old, then you 110% can. If you have a job and you don't see any people of colour in your team, you don't see any people of colour in management positions, have you ever spoken to your manager about it? If you're at university and you never see lecturers of colour from diverse backgrounds and you never really see anyone that looks like you in your lecture theatres, have you ever spoken to your supervisor or your tutor about it? If you hear racist banter, do you laugh it off? Do you just brush it under the rug, or do you call it out? These may seem like really small acts, but I cannot put into words how much of an instrumental effect they can have on society around you. Not to be morbid, but we're all gonna die one day. And the very least we can do is take our legacy seriously and strive to leave the world in a better place than when we found it. For me, if I'm honest, a central and immediate aspect of that is about protecting black children. And I want to leave the world knowing that the well-being of children is right at the heart of any policy or any law that relates to school education. I don't think that's really a big ask. Like, school education literally only exists for children. All in all, I mean, there's a lot more work that needs to be done to make our world better, and that's not only for black children, but for children across society. But in my opinion, empowering our own agency, celebrating all appearances, instilling self-confidence and encouraging children to feel proud of their identity is an important step in the right direction.